Well, good afternoon. Thank you. Thanks so much. Please be seated. Please be seated. Great to be back in Tampa. Great to be here with you. We've got a lot of luminaries with us today. We've got our Department of Environmental Protection Secretary Sean Hamilton, our Department of Education Commissioner Manny Diaz, our Secretary of Florida Department of Transportation Jared Perdue. We've got a number of state representatives. We have Senator Jay Collins from this is your district, right? This is where we're at. Jay Collins, and then we've got Representatives Gonzalez Pittman, Jocks, Maggard, Steele, Yeager, and Temple, and I want to thank them for all their hard work. We've got a lot to be excited about with what we're going to do today, signing the state's budget for the next fiscal year. But I would also say we've got a lot to be excited about. We've got two of our universities are in the College World Series in Omaha starting Friday, so that's pretty good. So we've got Florida State playing at 7 on Friday, Florida 7 on Saturday. Florida State will play again on Sunday, time depending on whether they win or lose, and Florida will play again on Monday. And they're in separate brackets, so it is possible. It's not necessarily likely in terms of what the prognosticators are saying, but it is possible that you could have a UF-FSU college national championship for baseball. That would be really, really fun if we were able to see that happen. So, and part of it is these are great universities to go to. That'll be reflected in what we're doing in terms of our budget. But the bottom line with this year's budget is this. We are providing historic support for education, historic support for conservation and environment and protecting natural resources, historic support for transportation and infrastructure, and major tax relief. All the while, the budget is actually spending less than we did last year. Aren't you happy to see that? And yes, we are proud to maintain a AAA credit rating. Florida is rated higher than the federal government, and we're going to continue to keep it that way, I can tell you that. Since taking office, largely because we've been prudent and we've been fiscally responsible, we have successfully paid off 36% of the state's outstanding tax-supported debt. From the entire history of Florida, we got 30. We have actual programs for. So for example, some of the wastewater projects that were line itemed, those are eligible for our wastewater grant program. We're doing $500 million a year set aside with the money that we got from the gaming with the Seminole Tribe, and actually it may end up being more than that because the money's coming in pretty good. So all those needs will be met. We wanted to go through that. But that is, and look, the governor, we do the veto. When I became governor, the record, I think, had been $800 million in vetoes. A couple years ago, we did $3.3 billion. That was 3% of the budget. And we did that because we're like, you know what? A lot of these were massive expenses that didn't need to happen. And I want to make sure we're paying down debt. I want to make sure we're having big budget surpluses. I want to make sure that, I think we now, Chris, have we quadrupled the rainy day fund? Definitely tripled it since I've been governor. You know, we've at least tripled the rainy day fund for the state. And there's many more reserves on top of that. So after doing the vetoes, we're spending less overall than we did last year, and that's yielding over $17 billion in surplus reserves, which is huge. When I became governor, what were we, $5 billion in reserves? And we actually have had more than that like the last couple years. But I was just like, honestly, what are we going to do with all this money? So we did $2.5 billion in tax cuts last year. And we did Moving Florida Forward, where we're accelerating infrastructure projects. So we took billions of dollars, we front-loaded it. So now some of these projects in Tampa, Orlando, that we're going to not even start till next decade, those are starting sooner. They're going to be done 7 to 10 years ahead of schedule. So that's a good use of resources, especially when the state is growing. So less spending than last year, record investment. This is the most we've ever spent for transportation and infrastructure, for building roads, doing all the things that we need to do. This is the biggest amount of money we've ever provided for education, K-12 education, our scholarship program, our public universities. All of that has set a record. Massive amounts of support for environmental stewardship, conservation, all the things that we've done so well on in Florida over these last 5.5 years. And yet, we're doing $1.5 billion in tax relief, including almost $500 million in toll relief. This is the second year we've done the toll reductions. So your commuters, you go through, they're pinging on your pass. At the end of the month, once you hit a certain amount where we know you're not a commuter, but we know you're a commuter and not a visitor, because we want the visitors to pay. That's fine. I actually like the fact that a lot of our taxes are paid by people that aren't Florida residents. I want them to have more of the burden than us. So it's good. You get a 50% rebate on your bill every month, just like that. So we saved $500 million in 2023. We're well on our way to doing that similar here in 2024. That just started in April, but that's going to go through an entire 12-month period. So this is really, really significant. And if you look at what we've done in tax relief just since I became governor, we've done over $6 billion in tax relief for businesses and families in the state of Florida. And that's hard to do when you don't have an income tax. Now, I'm glad we don't have an income tax. We're not going to have an income tax, but that's like the first tax people cut when they cut taxes. So we've had to do different things, and we were just able to do, on the cabinet meeting today, we approved the regulatory framework to implement the reduction in the business rent tax. Are we the only state that taxes that? One of the few states that taxes business rent. And so that's now going from 4.5% to 2%, and it's eventually going to be phased out. So that's a big deal. It makes Florida more attractive for businesses, and we've done things time and time again. So this year's tax package, we have the toll relief. We have the back-to-school sales tax holiday. So that's 14 days, no tax on clothing, footwear, wallets, backpacks, school supplies, learning aids, and technology up to $1,500. That's going to save Florida families almost $300 million just for that. We actually have 2 disaster preparedness tax holidays. Each lasts 14 days. So now we're in one of those windows all the way through June 14th, so it's coming up quickly. And then you have another bite at the apple, August 24th through September 6th, where pretty much anything you need to prepare for disaster, prepare for hurricane, you're going to be able to get tax-free, including things like generators, which I know a lot of people have wanted to do. Now, I have said this, August 24th. See, June historically is hurricane season, but the number of major storms is very low. As you get into mid-August, into September, and the beginning of October, that's when the frequency really happens. So you wait till August 24th. I mean, it's certainly you're in the window where it tends to be more frequent. So hopefully people will take advantage of this holiday, and then if they do need more then by all means do. But just keep in mind, once we get into, we do some of these trade missions. I had a foreign leader invite us to go second week of September, and I'm like, I can't do that. We plan a foreign trip in the second week of September. We will end up having a hurricane. Like if I don't plan anything, we won't have it. But if I plan it, it'll happen. But that is like peak season. So we just have to assume that could be something that we're going to monitor. But I would encourage all Floridians to take advantage of that. Starting July 1st, we've got Freedom Month. Recreational items and outdoor activities, tax-free. Take advantage of that. It's some really, really good stuff. And then we're going to continue doing our skilled worker tools sales tax holiday. So that's 1 week, and that's tools and equipment used by workers who are in the skilled trades, but it applies to everybody. You want to have stuff in your garage, you can go ahead and do it and put it in there, and we're happy to be able to get that done. So we have been able to do a lot. Oh, and by the way, $35 million in this budget for family tax credits. We have a child care tax credit now, which will provide tax credits to taxpayers operating child care facilities or making contributions to child care facilities on behalf of employees. You know, child care is a big issue, especially with people working. So this is really going to make it more attainable for folks. It's going to make sense for businesses to support these because they're going to get tax relief if they do it. So a great tax package. The current year we're in, that is the most Florida's ever done. We did $2.5 billion. Very difficult to ever match that. But I think this would be the second largest tax. Chris, is this the second largest we've ever done, or pretty close to it in the history of the state of Florida? So that's not bad. Now, economic development. We've led the nation every year I've been governor in new business formations, and that's something that we're proud of. We were named last year as the most entrepreneurial state in the nation by Digital Project Manager. We have the highest percentage of business creators, 13,238 small businesses per 100,000 residents, which is far more than the second place state. Our unemployment rate as of April of 2024 was 3.3%, which was significantly lower than the national average, which was close to 4%. And our statewide unemployment rate has been lower than the national rate for 42 consecutive months. So we're outdoing the nation, and that's because we have better policies than what they have throughout the rest of the nation. Now, our private sector job growth has increased by close to 250,000 jobs from April 2023 to the present. That's a growth rate of 2.5%, which is higher than the national growth rate of 1.6%. So significantly outpacing the nation. And as of April of 2024, Florida employers have added jobs for 46 of the last 48 months. And this is facing a lot of headwinds, particularly with Biden inflation. You have a lot of other problems that we see that the federal government is doing it. So we're excited about that. Now, what this budget does, it allows us to help facilitate some of that economic activity. And one of the things I've been able to use is the Job Growth Grant Fund. So this is $75 million in this budget. We had $75 million in current year. Actually, in the past, sometimes it's been less. But we're able to go, and local communities can apply, and we can go bring a grant for roads. We can bring a grant for workforce training. There's things that we've done that have made a huge, huge difference. And so that's something that I'm proud of. I thank the legislature for doing that, and we promise to use that well. Education. We're ranked 2 years in a row #1 in education in the United States. And we've been ranked #1 for higher education for our public university system for 8 years running. We're ranked #1 in education freedom for the second year in a row. We're ranked #1 for parental involvement in education, I think every year since those rankings have come out. And we're going to continue to lead on education. So I highlighted on Monday down in Miami, this budget will include $1.25 billion that can only be used to increase teacher salaries. No money to union, no money to bureaucracy, only for teacher salary increases, and that's more than the state of Florida has ever done. Current year, we had $1 billion in that categorical. Now it's up by another $250 million. So that's a huge, huge deal. And, you know, what I found with this and looking what other states have done, you know, it's not enough to say, oh, we're giving money for education, because what happens is districts and, unfortunately, these unions can haggle over this, and they basically try to benefit themselves. So you can increase funding for education, and unless you mandate that some of that goes to teachers, some of it doesn't even go to teachers. Sometimes they never do anything for teachers. So this has to go. That's the only thing they can do. And I would point out, we have paycheck protection now, so there's no automatic deduction of school union dues. You can have more money in your paycheck. You don't have to write a check to a school union if they're not serving your interests. And I would note there were school unions in this state when last year's categorical came out of $1 billion. That money was there. The teachers were going to get more money. They were withholding that in negotiations to try to use that for leverage for other parts of their agenda. I tell you, if you're looking out for the best interests of the teachers, you'd have gotten that money in their pocket on July 1st as soon as it became available. It's not what some of them chose to do. They chose to delay. So this is $1.25 billion. It's got to go to teacher salary increases, and I think they need to do that sooner rather than later. We have a $1.7 billion for VPK and other early childhood education, which is the most we've ever done. The most we've ever done for K-12 schools, $28.4 billion. Our base student allocation is up by $150, $200 per student. And the thing about it is when you have that funding, we've said the $1.25 billion has got to go only for teacher salary increases, but you have all this other money. They can use that as well. Those are not decisions that are done at the state level. We don't set teacher salaries at the state level. That's done on a district by district basis. But if someone says something, 1.25 million, if anyone says that's somehow not enough, even though that's the most the state's ever done, well, you say, well, okay, we'll take some of the other money that the state gave you and increase salaries with that money. And then they start saying, oh, no, we can't. No, you can do that. You can absolutely do that. So there's a lot of money there to be able to do. And then, of course, our college system and university system, $1.7 billion funding for Florida colleges, $4.1 billion for our top-ranked state university system, and then $130 million in funding for nursing education programs. So we launched this a couple years ago because when COVID hit, you started to see a constriction in the availability of nurses. I think this was brewing before that, but that really took it to the breaking point. So we said we're going to make sure that we do this. So I don't think any state has done more to expand nurse training for nurses and pathways for people that want to become nurses than the state of Florida has done, and we've done that. I mean, honestly, it's gotten to the point people knew we're interested in nurses that they're sprinkling all this stuff in the budget. I'm like, well, wait a minute, I've got all this over here. Then they're like, oh, this person wants to do nursing training, this person. But we have done a lot in these last few years, and I think you'll see it. That will pay dividends for the state for many, many years to come. We've also, this is not our first rodeo with respect to making sure that we're standing against anti-Semitism in education, but in light of October 7th, I think we've seen the threats increase, unfortunately, across the country, although we don't let Hamas take over our universities in Florida. We kick them out if they try to do that. But we have $20 million in funding for security at Florida Jewish day schools, so that's a huge increase of what we've done in the past, and we're happy to be able to do that. We also have money, over $7 million in funding to various Holocaust memorial and education centers around the state, which is something that I think we need that given what you see going on at places like Columbia and all this. You know, you wonder, what are they teaching these students? I know a lot of them aren't even students, they're just activists, but still, it's been very, very disappointing to see what's going on. All in, we have $360 million for school safety initiatives throughout all of our K through 12 institutions, and that's a huge amount of money, and we've been doing that every year since I've been governor because we understand how it's important. We've also done $20 million in funding to enhance security at Florida's HBCUs, and if you look at our K through 12 education budget, this is something that we really spearheaded when I became governor. You know, we believe that central to education is not just preparing students to be able to be productive in the economy, which of course you want to do, but we've got to prepare students to be good citizens of this republic, and that requires good education in civics, good education in our Constitution, understanding the founding principles that this country was built upon. So we have another $1.5 million to support and expand the Florida Civics and Debate Initiative. I think when I became governor, I think it was like 6 districts were doing civics and debate. Now we have all 67 school districts and the virtual, so more than 67 school districts are doing this speech civics and debate initiative. We have $6 million for civic literacy and civic professional development initiatives, and then $10 million for what we've called the Florida Civic Seal of Excellence program. So what we said was, yeah, we can sit here and say how important civics is. We can require high school students learn certain things, but you got to have teachers who are well equipped with this and know which direction that we want to go. And the fact of the matter is, Most universities in this country, if you want to pursue a vocation and understanding American history, but particularly the founding period, that is not something that a lot of these universities are embracing anymore. They've turned their back on really the whole Western canon, but certainly the founding fathers. A lot of these universities treat them as villains. That's not how we do it in Florida anymore. I mean, it probably was done in the past. So we've really done things. New College in Sarasota, Hamilton Center at UF, all these things. Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom down at FIU. All these things are great, but the reality is we want to make sure that our civics teachers have the foundation that even if they were diligent in this field in college, probably didn't get what they needed to get. So we created a 50-hour training course. Teachers that go through it earn the Civic Seal of Excellence, and they get a $3,000 bonus. And I think the approval rating of the course is like 90-some%. Because we brought in scholars from Hillsdale College, Heritage Foundation, all these places to talk about, okay, how did this country come to being? What were the ideas that went into the formulation of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and all the other important periods since then? So I'm proud that that program is continuing, and that's going to be 3,000 more teachers are going to go through our Civic Seal of Excellence program. We also are making sure that we continue our #1 ranking in higher education. So you have $5.8 billion across our colleges and universities. Some of that we have performance funding. The ones that do well are eligible for more funding. We're trying to create good incentives. But one of the things we said was, because people will complain about some of these loony college professors, and it's like, why is that have to be the case? Why do you need to have that? That's not serving the best interests of Florida. And so, what we found was, if you let hiring be determined by the existing faculty, well, guess what? If a candidate is known to dissent from orthodoxy, they're not going to get hired. That's what happens all across the country. So he said, we want to be able to empower our university presidents and our university board of trustees to recruit directly great scholars from around the country. So now you can have the president at USF, you can have the chairman of the board at USF go to Princeton and say, you know what, we got a great history professor, why don't you come to Tampa? And then they can offer them a good salary. So we have $100 million in this budget for faculty retention and recruiting new college faculty. So that makes a huge, huge difference to be able to do that. And if you look at what they've done at New College and UF, with the Hamilton Center in particular, they brought in dozens of faculty because we now have this really, I think, effective process, and we're putting money behind it. So, you're in some of these universities where they don't have academic freedom, and some of these professors are even worried about their safety because of all the nonsense going on. Well, you can come here, and not only you come here, they can cut you a deal where you make more money. Well, that's a pretty easy decision at that point. So I'm excited about that. I think it's really, really good, and I think it's going to... who was being hired at some of these places, 10 years ago, some of those people wouldn't be able to be hired in our Florida universities now because the bar has gone up, I think, in a way that's been very, very positive. So we want to keep that momentum going. Now, this is all being done, all the stuff with the universities, and you saw Wall Street Journal ranked University of Florida the #1 ranked public university in the United States, 15th overall. That's pretty impressive. It used to be, the only #1 would be like basketball and football, and now to be #1 in America, you're talking about like Michigan, Berkeley, schools that, have a long pedigree. So that's really, really exciting. But we're doing all this investment with no tuition increases for years. It's been no one can even remember when there's been a tuition increase. And since I've been governor, the amount that tuition at our state universities has gone up has been zero. No increases in tuition. So $6,300 is the average tuition at our state universities for Florida residents. And we fully fund Bright Future scholarships in the budget. So if you're a top performing student, you don't even pay any tuition. If you're top performing but maybe just a cut below some of the scores that are required, you get 75% off your tuition. So we've made it, even with Bright Futures, obviously anyone can handle that at that point, but even if you don't qualify for that, you can get a part-time job and pay $6,300 in tuition. That's attainable. You can't get a part-time job and pay $75,000 for tuition like you have at some of these schools across the country. And I was talking with some of these guys who were in, kind of big power positions in like New York. And this was interesting because they were talking about what's going on in Columbia, Harvard, all these places. They're like, the hell with it. People aren't going to send their kids there. They're just going to send them to Florida. And I'm like, yes, exactly. So I think you're starting to see big changes in all this nationally, and how our whole higher education system is looked about. And I think it's been very positive. But as a Florida resident, you can go. I mean, I think it's harder to get into these schools than it used to be. I tell you, when I was in high school, it was a lot easier than it is now. So there's a lot of competition. But man, to be able to go and effectively be guaranteed to graduate debt-free, that is a huge thing. And oh, by the way, for all you Floridians that are grandparents qualify for in-state tuition for their grandchildren. So you may have family in Michigan, grandkids in Michigan or Ohio or New York or wherever. Just know that if they want to do a state university, they can qualify based on your residency as a grandparent. I actually had a mother and her daughter come into the office. They were out of state, and I knew them from other endeavors. And just talking about the grandmother living in Florida, I was like, well, you get in-state tuition. And they're like, well, I don't, they didn't approve it. I was like, no, we're going to approve that. And because you're right, it's an entitlement that we do that. So that's really exciting. So no tuition increases and in-state tuition for grandchildren. Show me another state that can beat that. I don't think you can. Now, as much as I'm proud about what the universities have done, and I think we have a lot more that we need to do, not everyone needs to go to a 4-year college to be successful. And the thoughts over many years where people would say, oh, if you're not going to college, you're not going to be successful. That's not true. There's different pathways to success. Certainly people that have gone deep into debt with degrees that really aren't worth much, that's been a millstone around their neck. So we've put a big emphasis on workforce education. This budget has $765 million to support workforce education throughout the state of Florida, including close to $500 million for high school programs that are focusing on workforce, and those have been very successful. So we want to continue to do that because I think it's really important. Now, so I'd say all in all, education, probably the most significant investment in education in this year's budget that the state has ever done in its entire history. Healthcare. So we have $232 million in this budget for cancer research funding, with $60 million for the Florida Cancer Innovation Fund that supports groundbreaking cancer research, and continues $127.5 million for our First Lady, Casey, my wife's cancer research program that she's really spearheaded. So I'm proud of what we've been able to do. I'm proud of what you've seen out of Moffett. I'm proud of what you've seen down at Sylvester. And we're doing more across the state on cancer, which is great. We are also in this budget dedicated to supporting families. So in this budget, funding provided in the Live Healthy initiative, which was Senator Pasadomo's major projects this legislative session, we have an additional $456.5 million to support the health of pregnant women, new moms, and children throughout the state of Florida, and we've never done anything on that level. We also have $93.2 million in additional funds to support individuals within the child welfare system, which includes an additional $10 million to expand adoption incentives to assist in finding forever homes for more foster children. So that is really walking the walk, not just talking the talk. In addition, this budget continues Florida's mission of prioritizing care for senior citizens. We have $70 million going towards our effort to combat the effects of Alzheimer's. And in the university budget, there's research money for Alzheimer's as well. But this funding will support caregivers and individuals diagnosed with Alzheimer's and other related memory disorders. In addition to that, we have $115 million to support seniors through the Community Care for the Elderly program and the Home Care for the Elderly program. These are vital services for seniors like adult daycare, home-delivered meals, and home modifications. And we understand that there's challenges, and we want to step up and help to meet those challenges from the state of Florida. Now, the budget, combined with Live Healthy, has $377 million in funding for Floridians with unique abilities, including $38 million to support enrollment of eligible individuals into a pilot program that provides for the comprehensive coverage of services to individuals with disabilities. We have $56 million to enroll individuals currently in a pre-enrollment category for I-budget waiver services, and $64.8 million to enroll those in crisis and I-budget waiver services. But this year, this budget, along with Live Healthy, appropriates more than $2.2 billion to the Agency for Persons with Disabilities for services through the I-budget waiver. That is the highest level of funding for direct services for individuals with disability in the entire history of the state of Florida. Now, transportation. So we have the highest amount of money. And don't forget, I'm going through all this. This budget spends less than last year, and we're still able to do all this. So $15.5 billion for our Florida Department of Transportation work program. That is a record. $14.5 for the Department of Transportation work program. Overall budget, $15.5 billion. That includes additional money for our Moving Florida Forward, but that is a huge, huge deal. You know, I look around the country, if you go to some of these places like New York. So our budget in Florida, we have millions of more people living in Florida than live in New York now, and yet their budget is over twice the size of our budget. And so you'd think, man, they must have great roads and this services. And not only the roads, but they charge massive tolls. If you drive around all the boroughs of New York City, you probably pay $50, $60, $70 in tolls. It's unbelievable tolls, and yet the roads are rocky. You feel like you're on a roller coaster going around like that. And people that move from New York tell me, how come your roads are so much better than ours? You guys pay such less in taxes, and yet your roads are better. So it's really, really significant, and I think it's because we've got a good department, and I think it's because both the legislature now and in previous years has understood the importance of doing it, but our infrastructure is much better than many of these other states that tax people to smithereens. And so it just shows you, it's an interesting insight about how government can work or should work. So our infrastructure improvements are fully funded. They're ahead of schedule. Some of the projects will be completed 7 years, 10 years, 15, even 20 years ahead of schedule because of what we've done in the last two budgets. And that is going to make a huge, huge difference. Just think about an extra 7 years sitting in some of the traffic, not something that you want to be able to do that. Now, we've got a lot of different things in the budget for transportation, highway construction, 140 new lane miles, almost $2 billion for 3,100 lane miles of resurfacing, over $100 million for airport infrastructure, $334 million for different aviation improvements, almost $400 million for bridge repairs and bridge replacements, money for safety, money for community trail projects. So this is very robust, and this is meeting the needs of the people of the state of Florida. We also include almost $180 million to continue supporting the Office of Opioid Recovery. So that's a huge amount of money going to opioid recovery. So there's going to be a variety of ways where that money is going to be used. One of the things we're doing is $31 million to continue and expand the Coordinated Opioid Recovery Network. It's our core network. So this provides rescue response to support immediate treatment, stabilization, and assessment of patients with drug use symptoms and addictions. And what that has led to is Florida actually having a reduction in opioid deaths over the last 2 years now, I think, but certainly over the previous year. And that is not the trend around the country. So this has made an impact. It's tough. It's a tough issue. I wish we could just snap our fingers or just write a check and it would all go away. But this is something that's innovative. We've now expanded this to, I think, close to 30 Florida counties. It started in Palm Beach, and then we expanded from there and expanded even more. So lives have been saved as a result of that. And that ultimately is what it's all about, showing the metrics. So we like the direction it's gone. It's tough. It's really, really tough, but we've shown progress, and that's very, very exciting to be able to do. We're also supporting law enforcement in their mission to combat opioid. Part of that is we have people coming across the border that are dealing drugs in our communities. We've had tough penalties on that, but also the response if there's an overdose to be able to save somebody. We've invested a lot of money in that over the years, and I know that that's done a lot to save lives. Environment. Sean Hamilton will talk a little bit about this, but we have, since 2019, secured over $6.5 billion for water quality improvements and restoration of Florida Everglades. That is so much more than anyone had been able to do prior. This budget includes $1.5 billion funding, which will continue for Everglades restoration, natural lands, waterways, maintaining infrastructure for water quality. Really, really big stuff. I mean, you're talking about things that are going to make a huge, huge difference in really all parts of the state. I mean, the Everglades are a big part, but there's a whole bunch of other pieces that go into that. So I'm really, really proud of that. Thanks for the legislature for doing that. Now, we do have $3 million to fund state efforts to remove these invasive Burmese pythons from the Everglades. This is like a big deal. People will go hunt them. We've gotten massive numbers of these pythons out, but they reproduce so quickly that it's really, really tough. So this money is going to allow maybe some additional approaches to try to figure out a way to isolate that, because, I mean, they've really wreaked havoc. They are non-native. I think after Hurricane Andrew, they got in there somehow, and it's been really, really problematic. So we got a lot of people that want to hunt them, but I think we've got to do even more than that. So a total of $535 million for targeted water quality improvements in critical bodies of water, and our blue-green algae task force recommendation. So $110 million for water quality improvement grant program, $100 million for Indian River Lagoon restoration, $25 million to accelerate projects to meet nutrient reduction goals, $20 million for critical infrastructure, including wastewater and stormwater projects, and coral reef restoration, places like Biscayne Bay, $25 million for water quality improvements in Caloosahatchee, $55 million to restore Florida's unique springs, acquire more land in surrounding areas, $40 million to combat algal blooms, including red tide, and some of this stuff has been effective in the lab, and now they're trying to figure out what can you do to go out and do. You don't want to put this stuff in and kill the red tide, but then cause all these other problems. So they're studying this. We've been working with labs for many years now, and so we think we're going to end up continuing to have good news. But I can tell you the cleanup is much better than it used to be, and they've done a lot to be able to do. So we have emergency money. If we have a bloom, you can go send to local governments to help them mitigate. So I'm proud that we're continuing our commitment to environment. So all in all, I think that this is a budget that shows it can be done. You hear all these politicians flapping their gums, and yet around the country they produce suboptimal results. Massive unfunded liabilities, massive budget deficits, high crime, poor education, all these different things. And here we are in the state of Florida, number one for economy, number one for education, number one for lowest per capita debt, one of the lowest per capita tax burdens at the state level anywhere in the United States, having a budget that did all the things I talked about, provided all that tax relief, and yet comes in under this current year's budget, actually reducing spending. So we've shown how it's done. I want to thank the legislature for all their hard work. I'm proud of what this will do for the state as we continue our momentum going forward. This is the place to be. People want to come. Look, I don't ask people to come. It used to be like you'd have to recruit businesses. Now it's like businesses, a lot of them just want to come, right? And so there's been a lot of good things. There's also challenges with that. There's a lot of people, there's traffic. That's part of the reason we've put so much money in accelerating these projects. Because I'm like, if we don't accelerate this stuff, we're not even going to be able to keep our head above water on some of the traffic stuff. So we're very cognizant of that yes, when you have success, when people want to be a part of it, there are challenges you have to meet. Education, natural resources, transportation. So this budget reflects an understanding of that, and we've been very forward-leaning on a lot of stuff. And when you do things with a little bit of forethought, a lot of times you can prevent some of these problems from really getting bad. And I think that's really the mark of good leadership. So this is a great budget, $116.5 billion. I think it's probably less than half of what New York's budget is. This is a reduction in spending year over year, and yet historic support for the key things that we need to keep Florida growing, prosperous, and free. With that, before I sign the budget, we're going to hear from some of our folks who are going to be spearheading some of the funding that I talked about and continue to implement strong policy. So we'll start with Environment and Secretary Sean Hamilton.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon again. I'm Sean Hamlin, Secretary of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And it's fun being on the plane with other secretaries because we get to argue who the governor's favorite is. And so we tend to have that fun. But in all seriousness, I want to first of all thank the governor for his continued commitment to the environment. It has not wavered, and it has shown every step of the way with all of his actions and his support. Again, Governor, thank you for your commitment. All right, first, the governor talked a little bit about this, but I do want to go into details. We are definitely maximizing the investments to improve our water resources across the state and into the future. And so since 2019, the governor mentioned this, but I think, again, I feel like we get a little lost in understanding. We're talking about billions. A $6.5 billion investment to advance Everglades and water quality. Again, I don't know if you've been around long enough to understand what that means, but it's significant in creating the momentum we need to improve our natural resources. And so in the Florida's focus on Florida's Futures budget this fiscal year, we got $1.5 billion dedicated for Everglades restoration, and $850 of that is specifically for Everglades restoration. And I know the governor, it's interesting, right? When you break a record, it's not the same when you're breaking your own record, right? It's not quite the same, but it's important to note that the record being broke is the largest investment in Everglades history this fiscal year coming up, and that is amazing. And for the folks who have to deliver those projects, that will create the momentum that you continuously see as we see projects are completed and cross the finish line. But we're not stopping there. Obviously, the governor mentioned water resources across the state are important, and it requires continued and strategic investment. And so you're seeing over $500 million earmarked for those targeted water quality projects. Again, things are going to go to work in your communities, coupled with your dollars to make difference for your local communities. And so we'll continue to focus on that and deliver on those projects. And again, I love the fact that the governor talked about these critical waterways. These are critical assets, not just for those local communities, but it's part of the state's identity, right? Our Biscayne Bay, our Indian River Lagoon, our Caloosahatchee estuaries, all of our springs, those make up the identity of Florida. So it's important that we understand the importance of those investments. And then also wanted to mention our resilience. I know the governor talked about hurricane season, and I, like the governor, will not take any trips for hurricane season. I will stay home because I understand as soon as you book that hit enter on that flight, I assure you things will change. And same thing, we face unique challenges here in Florida, but the investments we've made in our resilience, over $281.5 dedicated to specific things like coral reef restoration. Again, bringing our grand total to $1.8 billion since the governor's take office, investing and improving our infrastructure. And that's a big deal when you consider the unique challenges we face. And I think depending on where you are, this hits home too. $50 billion for beach restoration and improvement. One of the frontline defenses, right, for as we think about some of our storms. And last but not least, and the governor talked about this because this is something I'm really excited, because if you think about our natural resources, all that we love, our state parks, provide us all a unique opportunity to connect to what we hold dear here in Florida. And so since the governor's commitment to state Florida's, we've been able to make more investments in our state park infrastructure in any time in its history. And with that, that also comes with a commitment to acquire additional conservation lands to add to those parks and make sure we're protecting those resources but providing those outlets. But one of the things we're excited about is the land acquisition. Since the governor's taken office, we've acquired over 265,000 acres of conservation land. That is 6 times more than the previous 4 years combined. And again, it's hard to understand and contemplate the momentum that we're seeing, but again, because of the governor's commitment and the support from the legislature, we are making a meaningful difference. And then one of the last things I'd like to close with, because the governor talked about citizenship, I think it's important to understand, and Governor, I don't even know if you know these numbers yet, but because of your Get Outdoors initiative focus and the Memorial Day weekend, we had over 500 million people come to the Florida state parks in one weekend. That's over 120,000 more than the previous weekend. So it's that type of focus, that commitment, while it's always so important to understand the value of that resource. So in the coming years, we're excited to answer the governor's challenge to make sure that we make investments in our state park, find ways to make sure folks are connecting with those natural resources. So we look forward to continuing that challenge. In closing, I just want to thank the governor for his continued commitment to the environment and staying true to his promise to make that one of the most meaningful priorities of his administration. Thank you, Governor.
All right. All right, education, Manny Diaz.
Thank you, Governor. It's great to be with you here to see you sign the Focus on Florida's Future budget. The name of this budget fits exactly what the governor's focus has always been, which is ensuring the state funds are invested in smart and thoughtful ways to pave the future for the state of Florida. There's a lot of positive things in this budget. Maybe I'm biased, Governor, but I think the education investment is the shining star of this budget. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to be in Hialeah with Governor DeSantis as he announced his commitment of $1.25 billion dedicated to teacher salary increases. This funding is historic, and it's an increase of over $200 million over the current year. But the important thing I want to highlight here is since the governor has been in office, he took on this challenge of creating this dedicated fund specifically for teacher salaries, directed at teacher salaries. And that investment is over $4 billion in the time that he has been governor. The teachers union had a hard time understanding how to read the budget following the press conference last Monday, but let me clear it up for them. Florida's making record investments in education without giving in to your politically driven agenda. Under Governor DeSantis' leadership, we've remained steadfast in our commitment to education, to our teachers, students, and their families, despite the noise from politically driven unions. The facts speak for themselves, and I know the governor said it, but I like to hear it over and over again. Florida ranks #1 for education 2 years in a row, according to U.S. News and World Report. 8 years in a row in higher education, according to U.S. News and World Report. #1 for 2 years in a row in the Parent Power Index by the Center for Educational Reform, and #1 2 years in a row in educational freedom by the Heritage Foundation. These achievements don't happen by accident. It is the bold leadership of Governor DeSantis and the policies enacted by our legislature and our governor. Again, I want to thank our governor for the hard work he's done to put Florida at the top in education, and I want to highlight some of those key investments. The governor spoke earlier about the $1.25 billion for teacher salary increases. The governor is investing a record amount in per-student funding, an additional $1.8 billion for the Florida Education Finance Program over the current year. This investment means that the 24-25 year will have an investment per student of $8,959. That's a per student increase of over $1,000 since the governor came into office. And it's important to highlight that, as the governor talked about, there are these dedicated funds, and now he's put in over $4 billion for teacher salaries. But the districts have flexibility within those other dollars to go ahead and make that commitment to teachers, and we expect that there be no delays and that those dollars be in teachers' pocketbooks immediately. To ensure that our youngest students have a strong educational foundation, the governor approved $438 million for the voluntary pre-K program. To support school safety, the governor approved $570 million for school safety, which also includes mental health because it goes along with our school safety component. Both the legislature and this governor have been committed to keeping our kids safe in school, and that includes $290 million for the Safe Schools allocation. That is an increase of $40 million over the current year. $180 million for the mental health allocation. That is an increase of $20 million over the current year. $20 million for security funding for Jewish day schools, as the governor mentioned. $20 million for facility hardening grants to keep our HBCUs safe and secure. Since 2019, the governor has made record investments in workforce education, and the focus on Florida Future's budget includes $1.8 billion for workforce education, bringing the total invested in workforce during the governor's time to $8.5 billion. So this is a governor that not just talks about this, but is actually putting his money where his mouth is, along with the legislature, to make these investments. And that includes $130 million for the pipeline and line nursing programs, which continue to be very successful, and $100 million for the workforce development cap grant. And that allows our state colleges and school districts to partner to create workforce programs to meet the demands. As the governor said, many businesses are trying to come to Florida. Many industries are growing in Florida. The biggest demand is on the workforce. So the investment from the state part is incredibly important to be able to create that training for that workforce so that those companies can continue to thrive here in Florida. I'm proud that I work with a governor that puts education on the forefront, and he continues to be the education governor, and Florida continues to be the education state. I look forward to continuing this momentum, and I know the governor will keep pushing next year as we go into next year's budget. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Governor, for your principled and steadfast leadership. You've prioritized and invested in infrastructure since day one. Jared Perdue, the Florida Department of Transportation Secretary. What a great story it is, and how proud I am to stand arm in arm with Secretary Hamilton. We can truly say that we are protecting and preserving Florida's natural resources and environment while building and investing in historic transportation infrastructure. This could not be done without the leadership of Governor DeSantis and our Florida legislature. Also, my wife and I have 5 daughters we're raising in the state of Florida. The investments in education are truly remarkable, and we're very excited about that. Under Governor DeSantis' focus on Florida's future budget, we've delivered huge wins and investments in transportation infrastructure, including, as you heard the governor mention, a historic $14.5 billion investment in FDOT's work program to preserve Florida's roadways, ensure the safety of our bridges, and add capacity throughout the state. This is nearly $500 million bigger than the current work program we're delivering in this current fiscal year budget. Not only does this year's budget support funding for roadways, it boasts a strategic investment of $44.5 million in our spaceports to keep Florida the national and worldwide leader in space activity occurring more specifically in and around the Canaveral area. It dedicates $289 million towards our aviation industry, which is busting at the seams with passengers, and also $109 million commitment to our seaports, which are critical to Florida's robust supply chain. I was also proud to see support for an almost $10 million investment to replace FDOT's heavy equipment and machinery. This ensures our team can carry out their vital mission of helping our communities when responding to emergency events. Hopefully, Governor, we don't have to rebuild any bridges this hurricane season, but we're ready to serve, and we're going to be there when our communities need us. Also included in this year's budget is $450 million for a second year of the governor's very popular toll relief program. Just last week, we announced over $42 million in savings for commuters statewide during the first month of this year's program. Tremendously excited about that. In addition to our record budget numbers, I'm very thankful to the governor and legislature for prioritizing additional investment of $370 million of general revenue for the Moving Florida Forward infrastructure initiative. This funding also ensures the Poinciana Parkway connector can now become a reality, and all Moving Florida Forward projects will be delivered 15 to 20 years ahead of schedule. Some of the state's most congested areas are just east of here on the I-4 corridor. Many of you know it. I drive it very often. I've heard the governor himself has been stuck in traffic there. We definitely want to fix that. It's part of the Moving Florida Forward initiative. One of the things I appreciate about Governor DeSantis' leadership is he has been a staunch advocate for innovation, cutting through red tape, and efficient government. Last year, immediately after the Moving Florida Forward initiative was signed, FDOT began working with industry partners to determine innovative ways to deliver some of the largest infrastructure projects in Florida's history, which is why today I'm also excited to announce that innovation has paid off and congestion relief will actually be felt in the I-4 corridor by the end of 2025 instead of 2030, which is the actual end of construction. Today, I-4 is 3 lanes in each direction. The original design for I-4 expansion centered around adding 2 additional lanes in each direction. FDOT and our industry partners have recently identified a way to add a new 3rd lane in each direction, which will actually be completed within the next 18 months by the end of 2025. This new lane will be added as part of an early works effort and provide immediate congestion relief for the traveling public. And as future phases of construction commence, this new lane will also be used to reduce the amount of lane closures drivers will experience in the corridor. This new auxiliary lane will begin near State Road 417 and stretch approximately 8 miles to US 27. This is a huge deal for Floridians. This innovative strategy has not been implemented anywhere else in the country. It's a win now and into the future. We could not do it without Governor DeSantis. In times when the federal government is prioritizing ideological and political agendas over actual infrastructure, I'm happy to live in the free state of Florida. The governor understands that people don't want politics. They want infrastructure that enables our families to get home safe each night and not be stuck in traffic. I appreciate the governor's leadership and his forward-thinking approach towards congestion relief. We're thankful to the legislature for continuing to support transportation, and we stand ready to deliver for Floridians. Thank you.
And will also help with I-4. You know, when Disney had their own government, they controlled it, you know, they didn't put in with the money. Now you're going to start to see that district under new leadership govern itself in a way that everyone's going to be chipping in to make sure that the infrastructure, even beyond the district boundaries, is smooth. And so I think that that's going to be very, very positive. Okay. Well, we're ready to make it official. So everyone that's going to participate in the bill signing, you can come up, gather around. Any young kids? There you go. I got, these are not permanent. You guys are old enough to probably be able to hand yourself. Some of these young kids get a permanent marker. All right, today's date is what? 12. Anyone else out there? All right, there it is. Oops, sorry about that. All right, well, good work, everybody. I'm really excited. You know, it's a lot of line items there, so we were going through it, and we I think, have a framework that's going to be very effective for Florida going forward. So I know we've got some more legislation that we're still processing, but I think this was the big enchilada that was left from the legislative session. So I'm glad we've got it done. I'm glad we've been able to meet the needs, but also to keep spending under control, which the people in Washington can learn a thing or two about that from us here in Florida. Okay, anyone have any questions? I think a lot of that's just obviously I'm going to be involved. I think some people are, we have a political committee. I do think that there's a number of things that are going to be important for the state's future here in Hillsborough. Obviously, you need to elect a prosecutor that is going to put criminals away and hold them accountable. And you have someone in office now who's doing that. So I think that's an important race. I think that the same race in Orlando is very important. The number one thing that have caused these cities to collapse, there's been a bunch of factors, but the minute a prosecutor goes in and wants to do political agenda and think that they're somehow pursuing social justice by releasing criminals, the quality of life goes down. The areas become more dangerous. And what they'll do in some of those jurisdictions, they'll say, oh, well, there's fewer crimes now because there's fewer reports of crime. Because if you get mugged in some of these places, no one even bothers to report it because they know nothing's going to happen. So I think those two races, are significant. And, I was just being downtown here in Tampa. If that marijuana passes, this will smell like marijuana, like when you go outside. It will, because it's written so broadly. How the court let that language on the ballot, I will never understand. You read the language, it does not do justice. The amendment language says that there can be no penalties for use or possession, civil, criminal, anything. I think it's going to be very difficult for businesses to operate without that infringing on them. I think you're going to see people, you'll be able to bring 20 joints to an elementary school. Is that really going to be good for the state of Florida? I don't think so. So this is just something where, there's not a single person in state prison for using marijuana. We have medical marijuana, and I know it exists elsewhere. But what this amendment really does is, even if you have no interest in marijuana, marijuana will have an interest in you. It's going to be a part of your life. You're going to smell it. It's going to be used in places that it shouldn't be used, and that's just the reality. It is so unbelievably broad the way it's written. So these are things that are important. And then, of course, with our budget, we've done a lot to support families and young mothers and everything, and I think that's important too. So we'll be involved. There'll be a lot to do, but it's interesting. Florida is a Republican state. Used to be a swing state, not anymore. Now no one's even talking about it. They talk about Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona. They talk about those states. They don't talk about Florida because everybody knows that Florida is a place that is going to vote Republican now. And oh, by the way, Hillsborough County is close to having a plurality of registered Republicans. No one thought that was possible. And I think probably by the election, I think you probably will have a plurality of Republicans, that Republicans will outnumber Democrats. That was unthinkable even 4 or 5 years ago.
And Governor, your office told us that you plan to appeal the gender affirming ruling from yesterday. So my question is, basically, we're talking about the budget and taxpayer dollars. Why should taxpayer dollars go to this case for the appeal?
Because it's wrong to mutilate minors. It is wrong. It is wrong to perform a sex change on a 16-year-old. You're not allowed to get a tattoo, but somehow you can have your privates cut off. Give me a break. This is wrong. And I would also say this has already been decided by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. They upheld Alabama's law, which was almost identical to Florida's law. This will be reversed. There's no question it'll be reversed. Think about it. When the Founding Fathers were creating the Constitution, and when the first Congress passed the Bill of Rights, or even when they passed the Reconstruction Amendments in the 1860s, do you think a single person involved in that thought that there was a constitutional right to do this genital mutilation? It's ridiculous. Of course a state can protect children against this, and we had very powerful testimony how this is irreversible. But this idea of using tax dollars, because like the media will point out, oh, the state is spending money to do. So if you say that we shouldn't do that, you're saying that any liberal judge should be able to veto the policy of the state of Florida because they go to the same judges every time, we lose almost every time, and then we win on appeal almost every time. That's what happens. So if you're not willing to defend Florida's duly enacted statutes against liberal jurisprudence, then you're basically saying the people of Florida shouldn't govern themselves and that we should just turn over our destiny to some trial judge somewhere. That I refuse to do. We are going to stand up for duly enacted statutes. We're going to stand up for protecting the innocence of these kids. But I would say it goes beyond that, because what this is doing, when they're doing a sex change on a teenager, there's a lot of people that want to make money off that. Consequences be damned. They're lining their pockets and they could care less about what's going to happen to that teenager when they become 25, which many regret and have big time problems as a result of that. But it's also just a fact of, you use the term gender affirming care, which is what media uses and what the left uses. You're not affirming that. You're trying to change their basic biology, which you cannot do. Okay? You cannot do that. How you're born is what you are. And so I think it's about, are we going to be rooted in truth as a society or not? And if we're rooted in truth, then you would say, of course you can't do these surgeries because it's not going to take and transform somebody that's a male into a female. So we'll win that appeal. We may win it very quickly, given that the 11th Circuit has already adjudicated this case going forward. But I think that this is something that we've seen from time and time again. We do election integrity. A judge will strike it down in Tallahassee. Then we go to the appeal. We win the appeal. Here on the sex change for minors, it's already been decided on appeal, so we'll definitely win that case on appeal. So these are things that I think we're just used to, but absolutely we are going to defend the people of Florida. I am not going to turn over the destiny of this state to liberal judges. First, the state of Florida, in just in the last couple of years, has done more than has ever been done in state history by a country mile. 2 special sessions of the legislature, and now I think $600 million for my Safe Florida Home project. But if you look, we now have 8 new companies that have come in since those reforms. A lot of people were saying all the companies were going to leave. It's been the opposite. And if you look at the rate filings this year, I think, what are we at on increase? Like it's gone down almost every year in terms of what's happening. So none of that would have happened except for what we've done. But I would also note that the overall economy has big inflation, and insurance is through the roof for everything. Auto insurance nationwide is up like 21% year over year. That's not because of anything Florida did. That's because of the inflationary policies that you see in the federal government. So if it costs 40%, 50%, sometimes even twice as much to repair a home than it did 5 years ago, those costs are going to be reflected, but that's an underlying defect in the overall national economy and these inflationary policies. But everything that the legislature has done in the last couple years, all the money that's been done has made a difference, and you would not have companies coming into the state of Florida now. And ultimately, if you want to get a valid rate where you're not being fleeced, the only way that you can guarantee that is to have competition in the marketplace. If you only have 1 or 2 choices, it's hard to limit that. If you have 8 choices, someone starts jacking up the rates, if that's not justifiable, you're going to have other companies that are going to come in and get your business. And so that I think you're starting to see, but I think it's something that takes a lot of time. But it sure would be nice to have different policies coming out of Washington so we don't see the increases that we've seen. And I get a kick out of the media trying to say that inflation has tamed. It only went up 3.2% or whatever. That's on top of all the increases for the last however many years. That's not in lieu of that. It's not like it only went up 3% over. That's in addition. So they keep piling on more and more to it, and that's been a big problem. But the companies that are coming in would not have happened had we not done what we've done. But any politician that comes and tells you that they're going to be able to just guarantee you they are selling you snake oil, because that's just not the way it works. It's a private market. There's a lot of factors that are involved that are beyond the control of what we can do. But I think what we've done has been effective. It's helped move companies into the market. And that's something that a lot of people said would not have been possible even just a couple years ago. Now, hopefully we don't get whacked this hurricane season, knock on wood. We'll be ready if we do, but I think that would be really positive for the market if we get through without any major events.
So on that note, we are starting hurricane season. Our team at Tampa Bay has reported rebuild Florida, Hurricane Irma, so preparing for the Fiscal program. We learned that unfortunately nearly 200 people still waiting for their homes. Dozens of others were prepared to go back. How do you respond to your concerns, and what do you hope to see going forward?
What's the rebuild? What's the? I know, but how many do we have? We still. Okay. Yeah. Look, I mean, these are long-term issues. We have Michael still going on. How many do we have in Michael still? Not as much. Yeah. So we do. But I would say this. Irma happened before I became governor. Michael happened before I became governor. If you look at the response for, say, Hurricane Ian, which was a Category 5, there's still a lot that needs to be done. But they're basically where most responses would be 5 years after the storm, and not only in year 2, basically. So you still have issues that need to be addressed. Some of this stuff is long term, but we've been able, I think, to do it in a way that has been very responsive, and we've worked with the local governments to be able to do that. And again, hopefully we don't have to be able to do that going forward, but I would look to say Category 5 storm, not only in Southwest Florida, but went across the whole state. Major damage. I think it was the costliest storm that we've ever had. And challenges remain. These are long-term recovery efforts. It does not happen overnight, unfortunately, but they're way ahead of where they were, where people would have been. And if you think about like Hurricane Andrew and Homestead, I mean, they were 10, 20 years into it and still was really tough. So that's good. But the Ian that we had to deal with directly, I think has been about as fast as any of these have been. Well, we love getting back. I grew up in the Bay Area. We like to get around the state and see all the great people and everything that's going on. So we wanted to get here and be able to do it. I think the budget is good for the entire state, but I think it'll have a very positive impact here in Tampa. If you look at what we're doing with environment, you look at what we're doing with education, you look at what we're doing with transportation and infrastructure, it's important stuff. And this area has really boomed. I mean, almost every part of Florida has done very well in comparative to the rest of the country over the last 4 or 5 years. But I think this area is doing really well. I think that there's a lot of possibilities going forward. Some of that will be reflected in the higher education that we see. I know there's, what do we have? The cybersecurity stuff was in there. There was a bunch of stuff. So I think people are going to be really happy. And when you're able to meet these big obligations, but then also be able to say we're returning $1.5 billion back to taxpayers. And oh, by the way, spending less than we did the year before. Most people say that probably wouldn't even be possible. Thanks, everybody.